Friction. Friction, the force which comes into play between the two surfaces in contact and opposes the motion of one body over the other, is called friction or force of friction. Properties of friction. It has these properties. 1. The force of friction acts between two objects in contact with each other. 2. The force of friction opposes the motion of an object. 3. It acts in a direction opposite to the direction of the motion of an object. 4. A rough surface exerts more force of friction than a smooth surface. Effects of friction. When the surface of a body moves over that of another body, the friction between them shows these effects. Friction produces heat. Frictional force converts mechanical energy into heat energy. For example, moving parts of a machine become hot. Friction causes wear and tear in a machine. If we compare old car tires with new car tires, we will find that the old ones are worn out. This is due to the friction between the ground and the car tires. Friction opposes motion. If we roll a football on a leveled ground, it stops after some time. Here too, friction opposes the motion. Advantages of friction. 1. Due to friction, we are able to walk on the ground. You know how difficult it is to walk on a slippery ground where friction is much less. 2. The friction permits us safe driving on the ground. 3. We are able to write on a paper because of friction between a paper and a pen or a pencil. 4. The application of brakes stops a car because of the presence of friction between tires and ground, and also between brakes and the drum of wheel. Disadvantages of friction. Although friction is of great importance in our life, yet in many cases it acts as an evil. Some of the disadvantages of friction are: 1. Friction reduces the efficiency of a machine, as it causes wear and tear in machinery parts in contact and are moving. 2. The generation of heat due to friction can damage the surface in contact. 3. Friction causes wastage of energy. The frictional force between the various parts in a machine produces a lot of heat and noise at the cost of mechanical energy. Hence, there is a loss of energy. Methods of reducing friction. Although friction between two surfaces can never be totally eliminated, but it can be reduced in these ways. 1. By polishing the surface. This makes the surface smooth and reduces friction. 2. By using lubricants, grease, oil. When a lubricant is used between two surfaces in contact, it forms a thin layer between the surfaces and reduces friction. 3. By using ball bearings. Small balls or rollers made of steel are placed between the two moving surfaces to reduce friction. 4. By using wheels or rollers on heavy suitcase. We can reduce the friction by using wheels or rollers so that we can pull the suitcase easily on the ground. 5. By streamlining. The objects moving in air or water encounter a lot of fluid friction. Resistance is reduced by making the body of these objects streamlined. A streamlined body is narrower in front and broader at the back. For example, aeroplanes, ships, boats, submarines, etc. have streamlined bodies. The bodies of aerial and aquatic animals like birds and fish are also streamlined, which help them in flying in air and swimming in water respectively. Know this: solid objects usually have more friction than liquid objects when they are pushed together. Two solid objects might be your feet walking across the dry floor. However, if you walk across a wet floor, your feet are solid and you can slip on the liquid.
Types of friction. Introduction. We do activities like walking, running, and playing, and in all these activities, friction play an important role. You must have seen people skiing on snow, an interesting sport that needs balancing and knowledge of frictional force. Do you know that frictional forces can be classified based on its features? Let us find out the various types of frictional force. Objectives. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe the types of friction, discuss advantages and disadvantages of friction, illustrate the way to reduce or increase the friction. Friction can be classified into 4 types: static friction, sliding friction, rolling friction, and fluid friction. The ball on ground is at rest at this point. Static friction is acting on it. The frictional force that exists between the two surfaces so long as they are relatively at rest when an external force acts is called static friction. There is no actual movement of the body in static friction. In static friction, force of static friction is equal to the applied force. Static friction ends with the beginning of sliding of the object at rest. When we push the ball, it starts moving. The frictional force present when one body moves slowly or slides over another body is known as sliding friction. Once a body slides, the sliding friction is reduced a little. It is less than the static friction. In sliding friction, the force of sliding friction is equal to the constant pull force. You must have seen attachers and other pieces of luggage fitted with rollers. Even a child can pull such pieces of luggage. Why is it so? Let us find out. The rollers reduce friction and roll on the objects on rollers. It is always easier to roll than to slide a body over another. That is the reason it is convenient to pull the luggages fitted with rollers. The force of friction between the rollers on a body and the surface is called the rolling friction. Rolling friction is much less than the sliding friction. Since the rolling friction is smaller than the sliding friction, sliding is replaced in most machines by rolling by the use of ball bearings. Common examples are the use of ball bearings between hubs and the axles of ceiling fans and bicycles.
Here's a cube that's placed on the table. We know that if we are pushing the cube in this direction, then the force of friction will act in the opposite direction. If we apply a force along the left, then the force of friction will act towards the right and vice versa. The force of friction will always oppose the applied force. What are the factors that affect the friction? Let me give you 3 situations and then you tell me what it depends on. The first situation is when an object with a smooth surface is moving on a surface which is very smooth. Second, in which the object has a smooth surface and the surface on which it moves is rough. Or the object has a rough surface and the surface on which it moves is smooth. And in the third case, the surface of the object as well as the surface of the table is rough. In which situation do you think will the force of friction be the highest? Intuitively, you will tell me that in the third case, the force of friction will be higher than these 2 cases. And in which situation will the force of friction be the lowest? it'll be the first case as both the surfaces are very smooth. Though there will be friction here, it will be lesser than that in the other two cases. If we just look at these three situations, we can say that the force of friction increases as we go towards the right. So can you tell me the first factor on which the force of friction depends? Yes, it depends on the nature of the surface on which the object moves and the nature of the surface of the object. Yes, it depends on the smoothness or the roughness of the two surfaces which are in contact with each other. If you want to find out if this is true, here's what you can do at home. Create an inclined slope on a table like this and mark a point somewhere on it. Now from this point, let a small cylindrical shaped object move down. You will see that it reaches a particular point and then stops. Next, place sandpaper right under the slope and leave the object from the same point as before. What do you notice? You will see that the distance covered by the object is lesser in the second case. And you probably know why. The surface on which the object rolled was rougher in the second case. And clearly, the force of friction was more. Why is friction caused though? It is caused due to the irregularities on the two surfaces in contact. What do I mean by irregularities? Now, even though the table looks smooth, if we zoom into the surface, we will see the surface irregularities. Even the surface of the object has irregularities. Though they are minor, they still exist. Now the irregularities on the surfaces lock into one another. So whenever we have to move an object, we need to overcome the irregularities. But why is the friction higher on rough surfaces? It's because rougher the surfaces, more will be the irregularities. And if the irregularities are more, then more force will be required to overcome them. So the first factor affecting the friction is the nature of surfaces. Is there any other factor you can think of? Let's say there are two bricks on a table. One weighs 2 kilograms and the other weighs 5 kilograms. Now I apply equal force on them towards the right. Which brick do you think will go further? Remember that they are both kept on the same surface. And the surfaces of the bricks are also the same. On applying the same amount of force, you will notice that the lighter brick covered more distance than the heavier one. What does this tell us? It tells us that the friction also depends on the force with which the two surfaces are pressed together. If the two surfaces are pressed harder, the friction will be more. Why is that? Because of the second brick's greater weight, it presses on the table with greater force. Since its surface and the table surface are pressed together harder, the interlocking between the irregularities is more. And this results in more friction. So mainly, there are two things on which the force of friction depends: the nature of both surfaces and the force with which the two surfaces are pressed together.
Friction, a necessary evil. Friction has many uses in our daily life, but at the same time, it is not always good for us. Let us discuss the uses and the harms of friction and understand how it is a necessary evil for us. Friction helps us walking on the road. On slippery surfaces, it is difficult to walk because of less friction. Friction helps us writing with a pen, pencil or chalk. As we write with a chalk on the board, the rough surface of the board rubs off the chalk particles which stick to the board. Friction helps the things to come to a stop. Without friction, no vehicle can stop on the road. Buildings are constructed because of the interlocking of rough surfaces with each other. That means, without friction, even buildings cannot be constructed. Friction is needed to fix a nail on the wall. We cannot fix a nail on the frictionless surface or smooth surface. If there is no friction, then we cannot light a matchstick. Matchstick box has a rough surface. As we rub the matchstick against it, the heat is produced due to friction and the matchstick lights up. we have discussed many uses of friction and we have seen how crucial it is for us. Now let us see the other side of friction. Soles of our shoes are torn out because of friction. As we walk on a very rough surface having more friction, it tears our footwear. As we have seen, that friction causes heat. In big and small machines such as sewing machine and factory machine, so much heat is released due to friction that over a period of time they get damaged. Tires of vehicles get damaged because of excess friction. So, we have seen that although friction is crucially used in our daily life, but it is harmful for us too. That is why we call it a necessary evil.
You can easily hold a glass tumbler in your hand. But will the same be true if the outer surface of the same glass tumbler is made greasy or has a film of cooking oil over it? It is due to the friction that we can write, hold, or can produce fire. It is difficult to move a heavy box on a rough surface. But it can be moved easily on a smooth surface. Friction opposes motion and can be increased if the two surfaces in contact are pressed harder. Friction can be increased or reduced by various methods. Have you ever thought why your shoes and tires are grooved? It is done to provide better grip on the ground. To increase the friction, the brakes are provided in the vehicles. As the brakes are applied, the brake pads arrest the motion of the rim due to friction. Do you know why kabaddi players or gymnasts apply some course of substance on their hands? They do so to increase the friction for better grip. In many situations, friction is undesirable, and so it is necessary to minimize it. You must have played the game of carom. We sprinkle powder on the carom board to reduce the friction so that the striker and the carom coins move smoothly on the board. Sometimes it is difficult to open the door. In such a situation, we pour few drops of oil on the hinges of a door, which reduces friction and make the movement of the door smooth. Due to repeated use, the friction between the moving parts of the machines increases, which reduces its efficiency. On applying grease, the friction between the moving parts reduces and thus the efficiency increases. It is difficult to move a heavy suitcase, but the same suitcase can be moved easily if it is provided with wheels, as wheels reduce friction.